Happy Mother's Day to all of you moms and aunts and grandmas and mentors that continually give of yourself to all of the different people that God has placed in your care. Yes, give them a hand for sure. I am very blessed this morning. I was preparing in the back, and when I walked out, I saw my own mother, who doesn't live here and is not supposed to be here. And she's sitting here with my grandma and my dad, and it's a huge Mother's Day gift for me. And I had this in my notes before I even knew she was going to be here. I just wanted to put that on the table. But I want to thank my own mom for teaching me to anchor my life in the Word of God. I saw and I grew up watching her read her Bible, and that relayed to me the importance of doing the same. I also want to thank her for loving me from 1989 to 1996, when I had really bad hair, really bad skin, really bad friends, really bad grades, and a very questionable driving record. She loved me unconditionally, and I am very thankful for her. And then my grandma is sitting next to her, and one of my favorite stories that could just probably convey how I feel about my grandma is there was a boy that I was dating in college who dumped me. He's sitting on the front row. Yeah. And I was so heartbroken, because I knew that that's who I was going to marry. He just didn't know it, but I knew it. And instead of calling friends or going out, I drove 45 minutes to my grandma's house. That's who I wanted, because she tickles my arm really nice when you sit next to her. And I just wanted to cry while she tickled my arm. So I am so thankful that she's here this morning. Now, with your cooperation, I want to test a theory. If you know who Moses is, can you show me just by raising your hands? If you've heard his name, right, if you've had the flannel graph story, the Bible story at night, okay. If you're like me, when you hear the name Moses, the first thing that comes to my mind is Charlton Heston from the 1956 movie, The 10 Commandments. And when I was growing up, my parents were very strict. They've loosened up, right? I'm the first child. By the fourth child, it was like a zoo. But for me, it was very strict. And we were only allowed to watch 4 movies: Jesus of Nazareth, Chariots of Fire, Ben-Hur, and the 10 Commandments. So when I was younger, this was my childhood crush. This is who I wanted to marry. I wanted to marry Moses. Now, before you think that I'm so spiritual that my crushes were Bible characters, I also have to confess that my other childhood crush was none other than Danny Tanner from Full House, because I absolutely loved that he was so clean and organized and type A. Okay? I married Danny Tanner. I married the real life Danny Tanner. But I digress. If you have heard of Moses, you know him as a man who was an Israelite child, and he was raised in an Egyptian palace. He encountered God at a burning bush. He facilitated the 10 plagues against the evil Pharaoh. He marched the Israelites out of slavery from Egypt. He parted the Red Sea. You could probably take Danny down. He's not as attractive to some other people as I might, see. He parted the Red Sea. He received the 10 Commandments from God. He led the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. He was a prophet. He was a judge. He was a ruler. He was a miracle maker. He was a biblical legend. And he was most definitely one of the premier influential leaders in history. But here's the issue. He did not get there on his own. He did not accomplish all of these things on his own. Now, here's the test. If you can name Moses' mother, would you raise your hand this morning? Okay. I knew my mom would, because she's got the Bible memorized from front to back. Okay. There's a total of about 3 of you. And that is my point this morning. Everybody knows Moses. Nobody knows Moses' mother. Her name was Jochebed. And when you read Moses' story in the book of Exodus, she is not featured as a prominent character. And so most of us miss the heroic things that she did. But this morning, we're going to focus and highlight Jochebed, for without her faith-filled life, none of those things would have been accomplished. Jochebed was an Israelite woman from the tribe of Levi, and she was married with 3 children. She is only mentioned in this big book with all of these pages and all of these words. She is only mentioned by name 2 times. And they are in very long passages of genealogy. And you all know, you skip over those because their names are too hard to pronounce. Do not lie, you're in church. Jochebed is referenced a few other times in Scripture, but only as she, or the Levite woman, or Moses' parents, never again by name. And I think many moms can identify with Jochebed in that we feel like we are part of the background story. We might feel overlooked and underappreciated and undervalued, wondering if anything that we do has any significance. Jochebed is not ever the focal point of a story. However, Israel's story of deliverance and redemption hinges upon her. See, in Exodus chapter 1, Pharaoh was the king of Egypt, and the Israelites were his slaves. He was feeling threatened that the Israelites were going to grow up and overthrow his authority, and so he issued a command that all children that were born to the Israelites that were male were to be taken from their family and thrown into the Nile to be drowned or eaten by crocodiles. Enter Jochebed. She is going to show us how a trial activates faith, how faith activates surrender, and then how surrender activates blessing. So let's first look at how a trial activates faith. In Exodus 2:2, it says this, and right away, do you see her name there? No, because her name's not in the story. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Now, Jochebed was aware of Pharaoh's command that all children that were born males were to be thrown into the Nile River. Now, listen, a pregnancy in and of itself brings about enough concerns for a mother, doesn't it? I used to lay awake thinking, is my baby healthy? Is my baby developing correctly? Is my baby going to have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth? Is my baby going to have 10 fingers and 10 toes? Is my baby going to look like my great-great-grandfather on my mother's side? I'm sorry, Grandma, I already had that written before you were here. Is my baby, I thought, is my baby going to have my second cousin's ears? Is my baby's head going to be too big? Like, these are all things that a pregnant mother thinks about. Now Jochebed, on top of all those typical maternal concerns, she has to wonder about the gender of the baby growing inside of her. Because if it's a boy, tragedy is looming. Imagine going through the pain of physically delivering a child, only to encounter a greater pain when you realize that because of your child's gender, they are now in immediate and severe danger. I envision a sadness when it's announced that her child is a boy, and the darkness of her reality sets in. This child whom she has loved and has already bonded with is going to be taken from her and thrown into the Nile. That's enough to paralyze anyone with fear, with terror, but not Jochebed. She chooses faith instead. It gives her a confidence. She is confident that God has a plan for her child that is greater than the plan that Pharaoh has for him. Pharaoh's plan for her child is death. God's plan is different. It says here that she saw he was a fine child. It's not making a comment about the attractiveness of her son or that he was handsome. It is saying she knew that her son was made for a divine purpose. And so she comes up with a plan to hide her son from the king. Now, many of us, when we think of Moses, we think of miracles such as parting the Red Sea or bread falling from heaven to feed the Israelites when they were in the desert. But I think, as a mother, one of the most incredible miracles associated with Moses' life is that a mother was able to keep an infant quiet enough for 3 months to hide him from anyone and everyone. If you have raised an infant or cared for an infant or walked past our church nursery at any given point, you know that this is almost an impossible task to keep a child quiet for 3 months. But she takes on this task because she is confident that God has a plan for her son. And not only is she confident, but she is also courageous. Just so we are abundantly clear this morning, Jochebed did not hide her child out of fear. This was not an act of cowardice on her part. In fact, thousands of years later, a writer in the book of Hebrews references this story. And this is what he says. He says, by faith. That doesn't say in fear. It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. Now, Moses is writing the story in Exodus that we are reading this morning, and he attributes this courageous act of hiding him as an infant, he attributes that to his mother. Now, thousands of years later, the author of Hebrews is referencing this story, and he expands the credit for this courageous act to the father. Right? He includes the father in this. And moms, we can identify with this, can't we? It's like when I gave birth to Kent, we didn't make it to the hospital in time to get an epidural that I so desperately wanted and was planning on. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, it was the 4th of July, and we encountered fireworks traffic on the way there. Two, I'm not bitter, okay? I just want to put that out there. Two, we were at my parents' house for a 4th of July party when the contractions started to come. So we had to drive to our house, and we were supposed to be a quick trip to drop off Parker with the sitter so that Eric and I could go to the hospital. Supposed to be. But Eric decides that it would be really unfortunate for him to be uncomfortable while I was giving birth, and so he had to take time to change clothes. Right. I told you, I'm not bitter. I'm over it. It's been almost 11 years. But the thing that really irked me was the next day when people would come to visit and see the baby, and they would pat Eric on the back and be like, "Good job, Dad. I heard it was a hard experience." Good job, Dad? All he did was hand me ice chips. What do you mean, good job, Dad? I did all the work. Congratulate me. Right? I feel like this is what's happening to Jochebed in this scenario. Moses clearly says that she saw that he was a fine child. She hid him. And now this author of Hebrews, thousands of years later, is including the father. Mother, same old story for us. But the serious point is this. Fear takes the easy way out. Jochebed's faith created a courage inside of her to face an obstacle, knowing that God was all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-present. You see, hiding her infant son was courageous because if the authorities found out, not only would they have taken her son from her, but they also most likely would have killed Jochebed, her husband, and her 2 other children that were older for her act of rebellion. But here's what's so profound. Jochebed's courageous act to preserve the life of her son, well, then that son grew up to preserve the life of an entire nation. If you are a mom, you can identify with Jochebed this morning in that you have probably had a situation involving a child that has created fear and anxiety and worry in your heart, in your mind. You have lost sleep because you have feared about how a hurt or a disappointment or a rejection was going to negatively affect your child. You have lost sleep because you have feared about a child's physical struggle or mental struggle or emotional struggle. I've only parented for 13 years, but I understand that the propensity to worry for a mom never expires. But like Jochebed, our trials should activate a faith in our God that gives us courage and confidence to face what's before us and before our children. Second, we see how faith activates surrender. Exodus 2, verse 3 says this, "But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch." That's her waterproofing the basket. "And then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile." You see, Jochebed's faith now has led her to a place of surrender. She was faced with the practical issue of not being able to hide her child any longer. His lungs had developed and his hungry cries were reaching the community and the neighborhood around her. And what many people do in an instance when they fear like they're losing control, they grip tighter. But what Jochebed shows us is that people of faith let go. She releases. Jochebed's act of surrender causes her to release her child by putting him in a basket and putting the basket in the Nile River. I did a little bit of research on the Nile River this week, and it is a formidable body of water. And at that particular time and in that particular region, it was known to be infested with crocodiles. But that's exactly where Jochebed puts her baby. That's how strong her confidence was in the Lord her God. How many of you moms have ever felt like you have released your child into crocodile-infested waters? The first day I walked my children up to that big old building they called kindergarten, and I let go of their hands and they walked away from me. I felt like I was releasing them into crocodile-infested waters. We're not there yet, but I imagine that the first time one of my children backs out of my driveway as a newly licensed driver, I will feel like I am releasing them to crocodile-infested waters. I'm like getting palpitations thinking about it, but the first time I have to drop one of them off at a dorm room, I will feel like I am dropping them off in crocodile-infested waters. And this one make me pass out almost. And when the day comes for them to marry somebody who, by the way, is going to love Jesus and the Cubs and me, I will still feel like I am releasing them into crocodile-infested waters. Because as a mother, surrendering our children, even to God, can be a very painful process. And it can feel like we're putting them in dangerous territory. And it feels that way because we think that our plans for our children are better than their plans, and sometimes we think that our plans for our children are even better than their Creator's plans. And we think that the tighter we hold on to our children, the safer they're going to be. But we know Moses as this revolutionary leader who grew up to save and to lead a nation. But none of that would have been possible if his mother didn't put him in the basket and put that basket in the river. We also see that not only does she release, but she repeats. The hand of God is the safest place for our children to be because he can protect them from the crocodiles of life. But the fact is this, we have to continually release our children to the Lord. Every time a worry or a fear surfaces, our response should be surrender. If you consider yourself a faith-filled parent today, surrender should be a healthy habit in our lives. Jochebed surrendered control first when she initially hid Moses, and then secondly when she had to put him in the Nile. And if you follow her story farther than we're going to go this morning, you will see that she has to surrender him yet a third time. See, we don't just surrender our children to the Lord when they're born or during a dedication service like we had here a few weeks ago. We surrender our children to the Lord every time we feel fear rising inside us and our grip on them tightening. Recently, my son Parker, he was 13, went to the country of Holland without me on a soccer trip. And I got a phone call when he was there that told me that he came down with a virus. And he had a fever, and he had body aches, and a sore throat, and the whole shebang. And I would like to tell you this morning that my first response was this: thank you for that information. I'm going to take it to the Lord in prayer now. And to go in and to pray and surrender my child to the Lord. That is not how it went down. My first plan, I was at a banquet, was to, I found Darla Brown, and I had a very mini meltdown. And then I got on Delta Airlines website, and I tried to get a last-minute ticket from Chicago to Amsterdam. And it was $2,300. So I had to come up with a plan B. Now, my plan B was swimming the Atlantic. I am going to be 39 this year, and I still have to plug my nose to go underwater. But I was going to find a way to doggy paddle across that ocean to go save my child. Finally, I had to surrender my child to the Lord. And I had to say, God, you can be with Parker when I can't, because you are the perfect parent. You can help him when I cannot be there, and you can be a presence for him. By releasing Moses into God's hands repeatedly Moms, say that word with me. Repeatedly. Repeatedly. All right, close enough. Then Moses was free to fulfill his destiny. A faith-filled mother's life is one of continual surrender, because when we place our child in the hands of God, his plans for their life can materialize. Lastly, we see then how surrender activates blessing. We're going to skip ahead a little bit to Exodus 2:9, and it says this. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So for the sake of time, we just jumped ahead 6 verses. So let me catch you up real quick. At this point, she has hid her child. She has put him in a basket in the Nile, and now God's plan really begins to take shape. Because as the baby floats down the river, God protects that child, and he directs that basket to float across the path of Pharaoh's daughter near the palace. The Pharaoh's daughter sees this child and immediately falls in love with this child and wants to raise him as her own. And I am guessing that Pharaoh is like most dads, that when the daughter comes to you and says she wants something, the dad cannot say no, right? I've done that a couple times to my dad. Even if your dad is Pharaoh and a vicious dictator, it's still hard to say no to your little girl. So the irony of this situation is not lost on me. To save her baby, Jochebed has to put him into the very river that she was trying to avoid in the first place for her child. And now her child is being raised in the very home of the man who wanted him dead in the first place. You see how God takes things and turns them upside down. But the story gets even better from here for Jochebed, because now the blessings are going to begin to flow. We see how God returns. Pharaoh's daughter names this child Moses, and from what we can tell in Scripture, she does have a genuine love for him. But since she did not birth him biologically, she cannot physically feed him. And so she is looking for somebody to nurse this child for her. And because God is so good at arranging circumstances for those that love him, he arranges a meeting between Pharaoh's daughter and guess who? Our friend Jochebed. And the eventual outcome of that meeting is this. Pharaoh's daughter, not knowing that Jochebed is his biological mother, asks Jochebed, "Will you nurse my baby until he can be weaned for me, and I will pay you?" And I think that would typically, according to what I researched, would be about 2 years. So look at this. Now Jochebed is able to freely enjoy extended time with her child. And they can be as loud as they want now because his identity is no longer a secret. She is given the joy of being able to witness his first smile, his first coos, his first claps, the first time he rolls over, the first time he plays peekaboo, the first words, his first steps. Those are all milestones that Jochebed thought she was never going to be able to experience. But the Lord returned to Jochebed that which she surrendered. We also see that God rewards. Practically speaking, Jochebed was financially compensated for her actions as well. Pharaoh's daughter offered to pay her to do a job she was already doing for free. There was no other woman in all of captivity that was getting paid to nurse their child. There is no woman in all of today that I know of that gets paid to nurse their own child. But this was God's way to go above and beyond to bless Jochebed, to show her his love and his favor. And then, here's my favorite part. On an even more meaningful and permanent scale, God rewards Jochebed with a legacy of faith for her children. She was blessed now because she saw her own faith reproduced in the lives of her son and of her descendants. And she authored a legacy of courage for those that came after her. Let's revisit Hebrews 11:23 says this. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. So go ahead and show, this is 4 verses later now, the same author is talking about Moses. And it says this. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt. He not fearing the king's anger. So look at the similarities. By faith, Moses' parents. By faith, Moses. Moses' parents were not afraid, so then what was Moses? Not afraid. Moses was not afraid of the king because his mother was not afraid of the king. His mother laid that faith foundation for her child to have that same faith in that same God. He was not afraid of the king because his mother was not afraid of the king. Moms, hear me today that do not minimize the impact that you can have on your child. Do not think that your influence on them is anything less than significant. You have the ability to create a faith-based legacy in your child that no one else has the power to do. It is never too early to begin to impart faith to your children. Moses is an old man when he's writing this story, and he is revisiting and recounting all the different events of his life. And this one in particular happened when he was 12 weeks old. It is never too early to start to impart faith to your children. But on that same token, it is never too late to begin a faith legacy. Maybe you didn't begin to walk with the Lord until you were an older adult yourself, and you might have grown children yourself. It is not too late to begin a faith legacy in your family. One mother's faith saved a nation. Her choice saved God's chosen people, and she is only mentioned by name 2 times here. Moms, you may not feel like a hero, but if you choose faith instead of fear, and if you continually surrender your child to the Lord, you will reap blessing. At this point, I'd like to invite the band and the prayer team to come forward if they could. I understand that not everyone here is a mother, or a parent for that matter. But God's word is universal, in that its principles apply to everyone. And this is the principle that we learned today, that God protects and directs what you surrender to him. He protected the infant Moses in the dangerous waters, and he directed the basket to shore. You see, fear and control go hand in hand. It's because we try to control what we fear losing. But hear me today, there does not need to be any fear in surrender. Because when you hand over to God something that you care deeply about, you are not only handing something you cherish over to hands that are capable or powerful, but you are handing something over to someone who is perfect. He will not make a mistake with what you surrender to him. So what are you holding on tightly to this morning that you need to release to God? What needs to go in the basket for you today? For Jochebed, it was her baby. For some of us, it might be your heart. You may not have ever surrendered your life to God because you're trying to control it on your own. And friends, you are compromising a blessing and you are missing out on the purpose and the destiny that God has for you. There is no fear in surrender. So put your life in the basket today and put it into God's hands. For some of you, it might be a dream. And the dream has not materialized, and so it has caused frustration and darkness in your life. Friends, today, take that dream, put it in the basket, and put it into God's hands. For some of us, maybe it's a trial, either with a relationship or with your health or with your finances, and you are trying to fix it all on your own. Surrender it today. Put it in the basket and put it in the hands of God. Maybe for some of you, it's your future. You're trying to author your own destiny, but it will fall short. Surrender it and put it in the basket and hand it over to God. And for some of us here today, maybe it is our children, a fear or a worry we have about them, and that monopolizes our time and our attention. Let's put them in a basket this morning. Casey, will you hand me those baskets, right? Listen, I am well aware that Moses was not put in a laundry basket, okay? This would not float. But this morning, I am putting baskets across the platform this morning, and my encouragement to you is to take inventory of your life and to identify things that you need to surrender to the Lord. And on the seats near you or around you should be a pink piece of paper. Pink for Mother's Day, right? Because I'm a girl. I'd like you in just one word, It doesn't have to be a novel, and you don't have to go in great detail because you and God know the particulars. But I'd like you to write what you need to surrender to God this morning. And then as the worship team sings in a symbolic act of faith, I invite you to display courage and to walk down and to put that in the basket and to surrender it to God and to leave it in His hands. And in doing so, I know that we have children here today. I want them to see the courage of their grandparents, of their parents, of their aunts and uncles, of the other adults in this church. Because if you don't have fear, then they will not have fear, as we learned from our story this morning. So I'm going to start. I have my own 2 pink pieces of paper. And I have Kent and Parker. Because these are the 2 things that I tend to worry about the most. These are the 2 things, and they say amen, that I try to control the most. I need to take my children, put them in the basket, put them in the hands of God, and allow Him to do what He is capable of doing. I'm not going to read these. These are confidential. You can put it in the basket and walk back to your seat. You can put it in the basket and spend some time praying. Or you can pray with any one of our prayer partners, and I encourage you to do that. They keep whatever you tell them in confidence, and they partner with you. I will leave you with this. God protects and directs what you give to Him. He did it for Jochebed, and He will do it for you. And then like Jochebed, when we let go, blessings follow. Matt, would you read us?